Hey folks, in this video we'll be going over the phases for Worra Duels. I've simplified the field since the last video. I just have my equipment and my draw deck and my first 5 cards. Let's assume that we just started the game and I'm going to go first. So based on these 5 cards I can adjust my equipment accordingly. So without taking action or anything, you can choose which weapon you're going to start out with. I have a mace proficiency in my hand and no axe proficiency, so it makes sense for me to have my mace equipped instead of the axe. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first. Then my first phase during my turn is the draw phase. I'm going to go ahead and draw one card. It's Resist Water. So I add that to my hand. Now I've got Resist Water, Mace Proficiency, Giant Strength, War Drum, Mana Potion, and a Health Potion. So we move from our draw phase into our action phase. Normally during your action phase you have a lot of options. In this case I could drink a potion. It wouldn't do me any good because I haven't taken any damage, but in the future it would. I could drink a mana potion, which would restore mana. Also wouldn't do me any good because it's the first turn. I could place down a continuous card active on the field. That would go into one of those 4 slots up here on the top of the field that we talked about in the last video. I also have a Giant Strength ability. This is a continuous offensive, where this one here is a continuous restoring. So I need to decide whether I want to start doing offensive damage or I want to get more mana every time that I'm struck by an opponent. So I'm going to go ahead and during my action I'm going to activate Giant Strength. This will give me 1 additional damage each round that it's out. So it'll cost me 3 mana to keep it going every round. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If I have the mana to support it, then it's a good thing. It'll basically give me additional physical damage. But if you start getting low on mana, you're going to have to discard it or deactivate it. So during my action phase, like I said, there's a lot of options. One option that's often really handy early game is to draw an additional card. So keep that in mind. If you don't really have much to start out with and you don't have continuous cards or something like that, you can draw an additional card that'll help you out. So I'm going to go ahead and place down Giant Strength for my my action. So it's active. Now if I were to attack, I will have additional damage. Then during my next phase, called the attack phase, I would use an instant offensive ability like this here. This is Mace Proficiency. Add 1 to bludgeoning weapon attacks. Or I can choose to just use a weapon. So if I use my Spike Mace, I will do a certain amount of damage plus the damage listed on the Giant Strength card. But if I use my Mace Proficiency at the same time, I will add even more damage. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. So during my action, I activated Giant Strength. During my attack, I'm going to use Mace Proficiency, which in the caption section says it can be used or has to be used with a bludgeoning weapon, which I have currently equipped. So in this case, I'll do 6 damage plus 1 and 2. So I'll do a total of 8 damage to my opponent on my attack phase. That goes into the discard pile after it's used, and then we come to our secondary action phase. During your secondary action phase, you can do anything that you could have done during your primary action phase if you had not used your primary action phase. So this means if I did not place down this ability during my primary action phase, I would now be able to do that on my secondary action phase. It wouldn't have made much sense for me to do that though, because this is an offensive ability and it was good for me to take advantage of it during my primary action phase to use it on my attack phase. Perhaps I would have placed down my restoring ability during my secondary action phase because it wouldn't have done me any good on my attack phase to have this active. However, it'll come around to my opponent's turn next, so if I use this on my secondary action phase, I'll then have it active and it'll be working for me during their turn. But as it was, I went ahead and put that down, so I do not get a secondary action phase because I put this down during my primary action phase. So then we come to the end phase. The end phase is when you make sure that you have taken away the proper amount of mana points or hit points that you may have lost during this round, and your opponent does the same. So in this case, because I lost 3 mana points for putting out Giant Strength, and I lost 3 mana points for using Mace Proficiency, I would have a deduction of 6 mana points from my starting total. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing you want to do during your end phase is to make sure that you don't have more than 7 cards. I currently have 4, but if you have 8 or more cards, you need to discard until you're down to 7. So definitely stuff to keep in mind during your end phase. So stay tuned. We're going to have a video on references, and then we'll have some videos on actual gameplay going back and forth.